I gave this company 29 years and 362 days. 3 days shy of my full pension when they fired me, I knew something was wrong the moment my office phone rang on that rainy Friday afternoon. No one ever summoned me to the executive floor unless there was trouble, and certainly not at 4:17 p.m. when half the building was already heading out for happy hour. I remember glancing at the blinking light on my phone like it was a warning flare. When I heard David Langston's voice on the other end asking if I had a moment to come up, I felt it in my gut. This wasn't just another compliance review. David Langston, young, polished, always smelling faintly of expensive cologne and ambition. He had been brought in just 6 months ago as CEO, one of those streamline or die hires. He came from the coast, they said, had a reputation for turning companies into lean machines. Translation cut everyone who remembered what integrity looked like. I straightened my navy blazer and grabbed my notebook. Old habits die hard. Even as I stepped into the elevator, I told myself this could be routine, a question, a clarification, nothing more. But then I saw it. A manila folder, sitting square in the center of his glassy, spotless desk. That folder told me more than any words ever could. David leaned back in his leather chair, his expression unreadable, like this was just another line item on his to-do list. "How long have you been with us, Joanne?" 29 years, is it? 29 years and 362 days, I said, evenly clasping my hands in my lap. That's quite the accomplishment. He gave a nod, like someone acknowledging a marathon runner at mile 25 before slashing their water supply. He slid the folder toward me with one perfectly manicured finger. "Due to budget constraints, we're letting you go." Effective immediately, my ears buzzed. For a second, I thought maybe I hadn't heard him correctly. Budget constraints. We'd just announced record profits last quarter. "This is your severance package," he continued. "Sign by tomorrow or get nothing. HR will assist you in clearing your desk." I should have cried or screamed or begged. That's what they probably expected, but a strange, icy calm washed over me. A stillness like the kind you feel right before a storm splits the sky open. Because this wasn't random. This was strategic, timed to the hour. 3 days, just 3 more days, and I would have been fully vested in the pension I'd worked my entire adult life to earn. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said softly, picking up the folder. David blinked just once. He was clearly expecting more of a scene. But I'd seen too much, documented, too much to ever give him that kind of satisfaction. I stood up, smoothed my skirt and walked out of his office, with every ounce of dignity I had left. Janet from HR met me near the elevators, her lips tight, her eyes apologetic. She didn't say much, only handed me a cardboard box and followed me to my office. I packed slowly. The photo of my late husband Thomas from our trip to Banff. The jade plant my daughter Elizabeth gave me when she left for college. A paperweight shaped like a globe gifted to me on my 10th work anniversary. Not much else. You learn after nearly 3 decades that what matters doesn't fit in boxes. Janet harped on Sandached and hovered as I finished. "I'm so sorry, Joanne." "This isn't right." "It is what it is," I said, but we both knew better. This wasn't just unethical, it was potentially illegal. You see, what David didn't know, or maybe underestimated, is that I am a compliance officer, and not just in name. I had spent the last 4 years documenting suspicious patterns inside GRW, manufacturing financial discrepancies, backdated reports, memos that vanished, approvals rushed through with no paper trail. I had sent emails, filed concerns, requested meetings, every one of them buried, and every one of them copied, because long ago I stopped trusting the system. The rain tapped steadily on my windshield as I drove home through the streets of St. Paul, past the cathedral where Thomas and I were married, past the high school where Elizabeth graduated, through neighborhoods where nothing seemed to change except me. I pulled into the driveway of my modest bungalow and sat still for a moment, watching the droplets race each other down the glass. I thought of the dinners missed, the vacations cut short, the nights I'd stayed up reading documentation no one else bothered to read. I'd given them everything, and now they wanted me gone, before I could collect what I'd earned. Inside, I made tea chamomile. The same one Thomas used to brew for me when I worked too late. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the severance folder, 3 months' pay. In exchange for signing away all rights to future claims, no pension, no healthcare continuation, no acknowledgement of 29 years, just silence, and a deadline, 5 p.m. tomorrow. They were counting on fear, on me being too tired, too defeated to fight, but they didn't know what I had in my safe. I walked down the hallway to the home office Thomas and I had shared. Behind a shelf of family photo albums was a fireproof lockbox. I pulled it out gently, the way you might with an heirloom. Inside were 4 years of quiet resistance. Emails, memos, invoices, financial statements, internal communications, snapshots of corruption neatly catalogued and labelled. I hadn't planned to use them. Not really, I was just doing my job, but now, it was time I locked the folder back inside, changed into my old college sweatshirt, and sat in the dark. I didn't cry, I didn't curse. I planned. Because I'd spent 29 years building a reputation for diligence, for precision, for never missing a detail. And now they would see exactly what that meant. Cliffhanger. They thought I'd go quietly, but I never do anything quietly. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared. I'd known fear before, real fear, the kind that comes with hospital rooms and whispered diagnoses. This was different. This was focus, a kind of still-burning clarity I hadn't felt in years. At 3:14 a.m., I got out of bed. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt damp, like it had been wrung out and left hanging. I padded down the hallway in my slippers, past the family portraits, past the quiet reminders of a life I'd built with care. Into the office again. The lockbox sat exactly where I'd left it. I placed it on the desk, flipped the latch, and began. There's something strange about revisiting old records you once kept, just to be thorough, like reading a diary of warnings no one else heeded. Some of the pages were printed, emails. Others were handwritten notes. The handwriting changed slightly over the years, tighter, more controlled, like the pressure of knowing grew heavier. Over time, I found the memo from 2019, the one I'd written about the missing invoice trail in Q3. I found the copied email, where an operations manager confessed they'd been asked to adjust product quality dates to meet a shipment goal. There were spreadsheets, expense reports, flagged, reimbursements, even financial summaries that had been quietly revised long after quarterly disclosures. I hadn't known what I was building back then, but now looking at it all, I realized I had constructed a fuse. All it needed was fire, and I knew exactly who to call. Gregory Santos. He'd once been our chief financial officer, a stickler like me. The only executive who had ever read every line of my reports without skimming. He left in 2020 for a role at the Securities and Exchange Commission, hadn't spoken to him since, but I still had his number. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then hit call. He answered on the second ring. "Joanne Whittaker," he said, almost surprised Gregory. "I hope I didn't wake you." "You didn't," he said quickly. "I was actually working late. What's going on?" There was no good way to say it, so I just told him the truth. "They fired me." A pause. "You're joking. 3 days before my pension, they said it was budget cuts." "Oh, God. They didn't count on what I've been keeping in a lockbox." I heard the rustle of papers, the chair creaking as he sat forward. "Tell me everything." We talked for nearly 2 hours. I laid it all out. Dates, documents, names. He asked precise questions. Took notes. When I mentioned David Langston's name, Gregory went silent for a moment. "He was involved in a case we investigated back in New Jersey," Gregory said. "We couldn't get anything to stick back then, but I knew there was more." "Well," I said, "you've got it now." He explained what the SEC could do under whistleblower protections, that I could file formally and safely, that they could open a full investigation if the evidence held up, that my pension situation, while cruel, wasn't even the biggest legal issue. This could become a federal securities fraud case. "Joanne," he said, "if it plays out the way I think it will, then let's make sure it does." Before we hung up, he gave me 3 instructions. Don't sign anything. Secure the files in multiple locations and prepare to come in. Monday morning to speak with the team. Saturday arrived with a new kind of energy. I brewed strong coffee, opened every window in the house, and began copying every document. 3 full sets, 1 for Gregory and the SEC, 1 for my own records, and 1 sealed in a fresh envelope for my safe deposit box downtown. By noon, I had compiled an indexed, chronologically ordered case file that stretched over 200 pages. By 2, my phone started ringing. Janet from HR, then David's office, then the company's general counsel. All of them wanted the same thing, my signature. The tone grew more urgent with each message. Joanne, we'd really appreciate if you could review the paperwork today. Miss Whittaker, it's imperative you return your signed documents by close of business. Joanne David here, call me back please. We can work this out. You're a valued part of the company's legacy. Legacy. They wanted me to vanish as a footnote, but I wasn't going to be a legacy. I was going to be a reckoning. At 4:32 p.m., the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw him, David Langston, wearing a tailored suit, holding something in his hand. He looked like a man trying very hard not to appear rattled. I didn't open the door. He knocked once, then twice more. Joanne. He called through the door. I know you're in there. This is ridiculous. Just sign the agreement and we can both move on. I stood silently, listening to the ticking clock on the wall behind me. Eventually, he placed the envelope in my mailbox and walked back to his car. I retrieved it only after I saw him drive away. Same paperwork, but this time a handwritten note attached. Final opportunity sign by 9 a.m. Monday. That evening, as I was reviewing my files again, my phone buzzed. Elizabeth. Our Saturday call. I hesitated. I'd thought about not telling her yet, but hearing her voice, warm, strong, always too far away, broke something in me. Hi, sweetheart. Hey, Mom. You sound weird. What's going on? I swallowed. They let me go yesterday. Silence, what? You're 3 days from retirement, I know. They can't do that. They just did. I'll fly in tomorrow, she said. I'll take the first flight, no, honey. I've got it covered, Mom. I'm serious. I've been preparing for this longer than they realize. She was quiet for a long beat. Do you need help? I need Monday to get here, I said, and then, we'll see. After we hung up, I sat in the living room, looking out at the darkened yard, lit only by the street lamp on the corner. A rabbit darted across the grass. The wind carried the smell of earth damp and clean. It felt like the night before, something important, not a battle, not quite, more like justice, slowly waking. Cliffhanger, I put the pen down. I had other plans for Monday morning. The weight of that briefcase wasn't just paper, it was justice tightly bound. Monday morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I woke before the alarm pulled on my navy blue pantsuit, the one I always reserved for important meetings, and took a moment in the mirror. My silver hair was pinned back neatly. No makeup, just resolve. I loaded the briefcase into the back seat and headed downtown past the half-melted snowbanks, past the still budding trees of early spring. The streets were unusually quiet for a Monday morning in St. Paul. But inside the federal building, it was a different kind of quiet. Heavy, watchful, like something had already started to shift beneath the surface. Gregory met me in the lobby, his trench coat still damp from the rain. He looked older than I remembered, more grey in his beard, more lines around the eyes. But the same sharp presence I'd always trusted Joanne, he said, offering his hand. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. I shook it firmly. They're better than you think. He smiled just faintly. That's what I hoped you'd say. The conference room was all glass and soft light, modern, sterile, impersonal. 2 people were already seated when we entered. Angela Brennan introduced herself first. Senior Enforcement Counsel, SEC, late 40s, cropped hair, no-nonsense demeanor, the kind of woman who had learned long ago to take up space without apology. Beside her was James Weston, a forensic accountant. He looked like someone who'd memorized every tax code by heart and liked it. They gestured for me to sit. Before we begin, Angela said calmly, I want to confirm that you understand what we're initiating here. Once you share this information with us, it becomes a formal investigation. There's no turning back. I understand, I said. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. Gregory nodded. We're ready for the next 3 hours. I walked them through everything. The memo I wrote in 2019 about shipments not matching invoices, the quality control reports that were backdated, the quiet manipulation of quarterly earnings to meet analyst expectations, the cost-cutting initiative David pushed through that circumvented safety protocols, and most importantly, the trail of documentation showing I had reported every single concern through the proper internal channels, each email, each meeting request, each unanswered warning. James flipped through the binder slowly, his brow furrowed. These discrepancies aren't minor, he muttered. They've been overstating revenues by at least 18% over 2 fiscal years. Angela looked up. And you brought these concerns forward internally. Many times I said, sliding a tabbed folder across the table. Here are copies of all my compliance memos. Each one was either dismissed or buried. When did you first notice things getting worse? About 4 years ago, but it intensified after David Langston arrived. Reports that used to go to finance suddenly got rerouted to his office. After that, nothing came back. Angela leaned forward. Do you believe your termination was related to these concerns? I met her eyes. Absolutely. They waited until 3 days before I'd qualify for full pension benefits. I'd just flagged serious issues in his latest initiative. He needed me gone. The room fell silent for a long moment. James closed the binder and looked at Angela. She nodded once, then turned back to me. Thank you, Mrs. Whittaker. This is a significant submission. We'll be initiating formal proceedings this week. It will remain confidential until we determine next steps. But, given the strength of what you've provided, I can tell you we won't be moving slowly. I exhaled. Not relief, not yet, but something like motion, like air starting to move in a long, still room. Gregory reached over and touched my hand. You did the right thing, he said softly. I didn't do it to be right, I replied. I did it because no one else would. I wasn't even home yet when my phone rang. It was Janet HR. Her voice was tight panicked. Joanne, something's happening. The board just called an emergency meeting. David's been locked in his office all morning. There are rumors, big ones. What kind of rumors? SEC investigators contacted our general counsel this morning. They're scrambling. Something's coming. Did you report something? I paused, then said quietly, I did what I should have done a long time ago. Janet exhaled shakily. Well, it's spreading and fast. By late afternoon, I received a formal letter from GRW Manufacturing's legal department. My termination had been retracted. I was now placed on administrative leave with full pay and benefits while an internal review was conducted. It was a transparent move, damage control, but it meant something very simple. They were scared. That evening, another call came, this time from the chairman of the board, William Hargrove. A man I'd seen maybe twice in person during my entire career. He always struck me as the type who paid attention only to stock prices and annual bonuses. Miss Whittaker, he said, his usual confidence sounding curiously hollow. We seem to have a situation that requires your input. Would you be willing to come into the office tomorrow morning to discuss things informally? I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. Hargrove. A pause. May I ask why? Because any discussion going forward should include my attorney and potentially representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm sure you understand. Silence. Then I see perhaps we'll arrange something more formal then. Yes, I said. Perhaps you should. That night the calls didn't stop. Colleagues, executives, PR consultants, even someone from the board's external counsel. I didn't answer any of them. That time had passed. The quiet woman in the corner office was no longer invisible, and the fuse I'd built, paper by paper, was now lit cliffhanger. They thought the worst thing I could do was speak up. They hadn't imagined what would happen when others started listening. By Wednesday morning, the storm had fully broken. I didn't need insider updates to know it had begun. Just a glance at my phone, alerts from the Minneapolis business journal The Seine, Paul Ledger, even a headline on CNN's app, SEC, launches investigation into GRW manufacturing, financial discrepancies. There it was. The silence was over. The rest of the day played out like a slow-motion reckoning. At 9:04 a.m., I received a brief email. Subject: employment status. From GRW legal body. Your termination has been formally rescinded, pending the outcome of an internal investigation. All benefits, including pension accrual, are to be reinstated retroactively. It was cold clinical, but in the legal world, it was a white flag. By 10:20 a.m. Janet texted me again. Janet HR. David hasn't left his office. PR team called in from Chicago Hargrove. Just told the board to go on communications. Lockdown, this is bad, Joanne. Bad for them, I thought. Necessary for everyone else. By noon, my phone rang again. This time it was Barbara Reynolds, my attorney. No relation, though, we liked the coincidence. They're feeling the heat, she said, skipping pleasantries. I have just been contacted by outside counsel for the board. They're requesting a formal meeting with you at your convenience, of course. How generous they want to avoid subpoenas. Maybe even offer you something preemptively. But we go on our terms. No surprises, agreed. And Joanne. She added, her voice softening just slightly. Don't let their politeness fool you. This isn't remorse. It's containment. We'll go in prepared. I smiled. I always am. The next morning, Barbara and I arrived at GRW headquarters together. Walking into that building again was surreal. The same glass doors, the same security guard who once awkwardly escorted me out, now gave a respectful nod, avoiding eye contact. The lobby, usually filled with casual chatter, and the aroma of bad coffee, was quiet. Tense employees glanced up as we passed. Some quickly looked away. Others held their gaze a little too long. Everyone knew. We were led to the executive boardroom, a space I'd never been invited to before. A long walnut table, high-backed chairs, water glasses too delicate for anyone actually working. The room was designed for power, but today it felt like a confession chamber. Inside sat 4 people. William Hargrove, the chairman, looking years older than he had last week. 2 other board members I barely recognized, polite smiles, eyes darting. And one woman I did recognize, Patricia Donovan, the chief operating officer. She had always struck me as someone just trying to survive in a world of louder men, quiet, competent, unremarkable. Today she looked ready for war. Barbara and I sat. No one reached across the table. No one offered coffee. William cleared his throat. Thank you for coming. Ms. Whitaker. Barbara raised a hand. We'll keep this brief. We understand there's been a sudden reconsideration of my client's value to the company. Yes, William said, his tone clipped. We want to make it clear that Miss Whitaker's termination was a mistake. We've reinstated her status benefits, and she doesn't want reinstatement. Barbara cut in smoothly. She wants accountability. William looked rattled. The other board members exchanged glances. I want to understand, I said calmly, how 47 internal compliance reports, 16 memos, and 9 meeting requests, only 2 of which were ever granted, resulted in silence. No one answered. Was it laziness, I continued, or fear, or just the belief that someone like me, quiet nearing retirement, would never push back hard enough to be a threat? We're investigating all those breakdowns, one board member offered. Weakly, Patricia spoke up. Then, Joanne, I reviewed your files, all of them. This wasn't just negligence, this was buried. Her words hung in the air like smoke. The meeting dragged on another hour. They spoke of new internal protocols, of transparency going forward. They offered vague promises of consulting roles, ethics committees, even a public acknowledgement of my dedication. Barbara remained unmoved. I remained quiet, because I wasn't there to be flattered. I was there to watch them squirm. As we stood to leave, William made one final plea. "We're hoping you'll speak with the SEC about the corrective actions we're taking," he said. "Your support could be invaluable." I turned to face him fully. For the first time, I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. I filed 47 major reports over 4 years. I said I wasn't invisible. You just chose not to see me. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "I'll cooperate fully with the SEC and with your internal investigation, but I will speak only to the facts, and whether those facts help you or destroy you depends on what you do next, not what you say in this room." Barbara smiled slightly as we walked out. That she whispered was perfectly stated. As we stepped outside, the wind picked up. Fresh, cold cleansing. The world hadn't changed, not yet, but the air felt different. Inside that briefcase now tucked against my leg wasn't just evidence. It was truth, and truth once exposed has a way of burning everything false to the ground. Cliffhanger. They thought they could erase me. They didn't realize I'd already become the story. The envelope had waited 3 years. Now it was time. It was a quiet Thursday morning when I drove to the bank. The sky was pale soft with clouds, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel heavy. I felt precise, like a scalpel finally reaching the skin. The branch manager, Tracy Ferguson, greeted me by name. We weren't friends exactly, but she'd handled my account for years, always warm, always efficient. "I've been following the news," she said softly as she led me to the back. "Is it true?" "Most of it," I said, "but not all yet." In the quiet of the private room, I unlocked my safe deposit box. Inside, wrapped in a plain manila envelope, was the file I'd copied and hidden years ago. At the time, I didn't know why. I just knew it didn't belong on a shared server, or even in my home office. It contained email exchanges between David Langston's predecessor, the previous CFO, and 2 current board members, open discussions about managing optics during a sensitive acquisition. They spoke in careful language, but the implication was unmistakable. They had manipulated financial reports to inflate value long before David arrived. David hadn't started the fire, he'd simply poured gasoline on it. I drove straight from the bank to the Federal Building. Gregory was already waiting. When I laid the envelope on the table, he raised an eyebrow. "You didn't mention more files. They weren't relevant before I said, but now with the narrative shifting, I think they are." He opened the folder and skimmed the first few pages. Then he stopped. "Joanne," he said, looking up, "this changes everything." That afternoon, I ignored the news. I didn't want to hear speculation. But my daughter Elizabeth did not. She called while I was reorganizing documents in the dining room, her voice tight. "Mom, have you seen what they're saying?" "No," I said. "I've been busy. They're trying to smear you." "There's this interview David gave. He's saying you had performance issues, that you were passed over for promotion years ago, and this is all personal revenge." I closed my eyes. Of course, the oldest trick in the book. "If he has to discredit me," I said slowly, "it means the evidence scared him. But people are starting to believe it, Mom. There are headlines like, 'Disgruntled employee or whistleblower.' It's disgusting. I don't need to fight back in the press," I said. "The truth doesn't need a PR team." Still that night, as I sat alone with a cup of tea gone cold, it stung. Not the lies, they were predictable, but the fact that even now, after all I'd done, the instinct of the world was to question the quiet woman who finally spoke. Barbara called just before midnight. "I saw the interviews," she said. "Don't worry. The SEC is preparing a public statement, verifying your whistleblower status. It'll land hard tomorrow." "I'm not worried," I said. "But I am. Tired, I know. But we're close." I looked down at the table at the neat piles of paper, the file tab still color-coded, just like I'd taught Elizabeth when she was 10. Let's finish it then. The next morning, it happened fast. An emergency board meeting was announced this time, without me, but I didn't need an invitation. Gregory called from inside the Federal Building, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's chaos in there." The SEC team just walked them through the new files, and 3 board members have resigned on the spot. David's trying to claim he was just continuing company precedent, but nobody's buying it anymore. By noon, GRW issued a press release. GRW. Manufacturing announces immediate leadership restructuring amid financial investigation. David Langston has been terminated for cause. 4 board members have resigned. The company pledges full cooperation with federal regulators. The stock fell another 12% that afternoon. By evening, I'd received another call, Janet again, but this time she wasn't whispering. "The interim CEO wants to meet with you," she said. "She says it's important. She wants to apologize." "Let her come to my lawyer's office," I said. "Are you okay?" she asked after a pause. For once, I didn't have to fake it. "I think I will be." The next day, I sat in Barbara's office when Patricia Donovan walked in. She looked exhausted but firm, dressed in slate grey, no jewelry. Her hands were steady, her voice even. She placed a folder on the table, almost identical to the one I'd received on the day they fired me. "This," she said quietly, "is not a termination. It's a reinstatement, with full pension, full benefits, retroactive to your original termination date." I opened it. There was more, a compensation package equal to 5 years of salary, healthcare for life, and most surprisingly, a formal apology signed by every remaining board member. "We also want you to help us rebuild," Patricia said. "Help design a new ethics program, something stronger, smarter." I looked at Barbara, who nodded slightly. But I shook my head. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I'm not coming back." Patricia didn't protest. She understood. Later that night, I sat by the lake near my house. The wind had calmed. My briefcase rested by my feet, lighter now, but still meaningful. Elizabeth and the kids were flying in this weekend. We talked about them moving back, maybe staying for good. I'd started thinking about that little dream again, teaching part-time, maybe setting up that scholarship I always mentioned but never prioritized. And the thought that lingered wasn't revenge, it was release. I hadn't burned anything down. I had simply let the light in cliffhanger. They tried to end my story in a conference room. Instead, I rewrote the ending in a courtroom. 6 months later, I sat in the back row of a federal courtroom, watching 3 men in suits shuffle toward the judge's bench, shoulders slumped, ties crooked, power drained. David Langston, Mark Halvorsen, Susan Bennett, 2 former board members and 1 former CEO, all of them pleading guilty. It was surreal, not triumphant, not vindicating, just quiet, like the click of a vault, finally closing. The courtroom was hushed as the judge read the charges aloud: securities fraud, financial misrepresentation, obstruction of compliance procedures. Each defendant acknowledged the charges, no denials, no final attempts to shift blame, just the admission that yes, what I had warned them about, what I had begged them to see, had been real all along. When they turned to leave, David's eyes met mine, for the briefest of moments. He didn't sneer, didn't smirk, didn't speak, but I saw it. Recognition, not of me, Joanne Whittaker, but of what I represented, consequences. In the weeks that followed, GRW manufacturing became a national case study. Articles flooded the media. When compliance officers are ignored, the woman who saved a company from itself. I hated the titles. I hadn't saved anything. I just refused to look away. They offered me a consulting position again, higher pay, more prestige, a legacy. I turned it down. Instead, I accepted an invitation from the SEC to help develop new whistleblower protocols to train future investigators in how to identify patterns, like the ones I once documented alone in a cubicle no one visited. The irony wasn't lost on me. I used to write reports no one read. Now people took notes when I spoke, with the SEC settlement, the whistleblower reward, and my fully vested pension. I had more financial security than I'd ever imagined possible, but I didn't buy a new car. I didn't move to Florida. I didn't throw a retirement party. I established a scholarship, named it the Thomas Whittaker Fellowship for Women in Ethics and Compliance. He would have liked that, He always said, I had a mind like a ledger and a heart like a lighthouse. I never understood it then, I do now. Elizabeth and the kids moved back to St. Paul in July. They're renting a little house by Summit Avenue while they figure things out. On weekends, they come to my lakeside place where the trees cast long shadows and the air smells like pine and quiet. My granddaughter Emily likes to sit on the dock with me at dusk. Grandma, she asked once, toes skimming the water, do you ever wish you hadn't worked there? At that company? I paused, watching the ripples fan out across the lake. No, I said finally. I don't regret working there. I regret that it ended the way it did, but not what I stood for. Was it scary? Of course. Then why'd you do it? I smiled because doing what's right is never about being fearless. It's about being unwilling to let fear make the decision for you. These days, GRW Manufacturing sends me their annual reports. New logo, new board, new mission statements about transparency and restoring public trust. Sometimes I read them, not out of nostalgia, but out of duty, because the system needs eyes, and because someone somewhere might still think people like me are easy to silence. Last month, I was invited to speak at a university ethics seminar. Afterwards, a student raised her hand. Mrs. Whittaker, do you think integrity is still valued in corporate America? I looked at her, young, bright-eyed, clearly uncertain about the world she was about to enter. It depends, I said. On what? On whether people like you are willing to live by it even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching. As I left the auditorium, a faculty member stopped me. You know, he said, people think of you as a whistleblower, but I think of you as something else. What's that, a mirror? You forced a company to look at itself, I nodded. Maybe he was right. Maybe that's all I ever was, a quiet woman with a notebook. And the courage to hold it up to the light. They called me invisible, but it was the truth they never saw, and the echo of integrity they'll never outrun. Sometimes the quietest people hold the loudest truths. Joanne Whittaker spent nearly 3 decades serving with integrity, only to be discarded days before her pension. But integrity isn't about applause. It's about doing what's right, even when it costs you everything. Her courage to speak up, to document, and to stand firm in the face of power reminds us never underestimate those who observe in silence. The systems we trust only work when someone dares to hold them accountable. Joanne didn't seek revenge, she sought justice, and in doing so, she became the voice for countless others who couldn't speak.